Welcome back to page 121. Today I'm going to take a look at the second step in setting up a Greyhawk campaign with the AD&D first edition rules, and I'm going to go into a book that's a bit of a troublemaker when you're doing that. Unearthed Arcana. If you've seen my review of this book, you know I love it, but this can be a book that can also be a source of some headaches for you as you're starting out your brand new campaign. I'm going to explain why in just a bit. So today I'm mostly going to take a look at the races that the player characters can choose to be, advantages and disadvantages for you and for them in general, and then I'm going to take a look at weapon specialization out of Unearthed Arcana, and that's where this book is a bit of a problem child. But again, I like it and I allow it. I'm just going to explain my rationale. So today on page 121, we're going to take a look at races and skills in starting a brand new AD&D Greyhawk campaign. Okay, before I begin on today's topic, I also want to remind you I'm doing a push for subscribers. Shooting for that magical 1,000 with YouTube. If you've been on the fence and you like what I've been doing, please go ahead and subscribe. That helps me out a little bit, and it'll help the channel to grow. So if you could, I would appreciate it. So back to the topic at hand. All right, we've picked out what player character class everybody wants to be. I discussed that in the last one. And I talked a little bit about race, but I'm going to go a little deeper into race on this one. And then we're also going to take a look at weapon specialization. Do you hear all the echoing scary stuff in that? Okay, so basically here's the character class limitations. Who can be what? We do adhere to this. So if I want to be a cavalier, I cannot be a dwarf. I could be an elf if I chose. That's kind of neat. If I want to be a magic user, no dwarves, but I can be elves, but no wild elf, but a wood elf. And then if I want to go to continue on for the deep gnomes and then the halflings, half elves. So this is just an expansion from the player's handbook as to who can be what based on the races on Arcana as well. So kind of neat. Humans can be anything. I like that. But humans can't multi-class. They can only dual class. I like that too. Nice restriction. So here we go to the maximum statistics for class levels, maximum stats and levels. I've thrown both of these out. I ignore these pages. It's just how I am. And then we go to the races themselves. So the dwarves, we get some gray dwarves here. We get the Duergar. The Duergar are the gray dwarves as player characters. Kind of interesting. They get some powers. That was kind of everybody's complaint about Unearthed Arcana, is that all the races seem to gain extra powers that the other races didn't have in the player's handbook. And I agree with that, but also D&D had grown since it was first published, since the player's handbook was published in 1978. It had grown. This was out in 85, and I thought this book reflected it. This book reflected a few problems, too, such as the fact that it was rushed to press and not really game-tested. But that's another thing. All that being said, if you saw my review of this book, you know I like this book. So we've gotten through our dwarf problem. Now we get to our elves. Oh my goodness, we know what's coming. The dark elves, also known as the drow. Who hasn't had a player come up to them and say, I want to be a drow ranger bow specialist? That's a lot of power gaming right there in that one sentence. A drow, even the male drows, gain a lot of innate magic spells. Female drows gain even more, and the way we've done it in our campaign is I don't like to differentiate between the male and the female, so the males get all the same powers the females get, which is a total of, once a day, you get Dancing Lights, Fairy Fire, Darkness 5-foot radius. At 4th level, they gain the ability to detect magic, know alignment, and levitate, also once a day. Females of 4th level or higher, so my campaign, everybody, can use clairvoyance, detect lie or reverse, suggestion, and dispel magic each once per day. That's a lot of power for a 4th level character to have. We've dealt with it. It hasn't been enough to shatter anything, but it can be a problem. So every time I start a new campaign, I wait for the inevitable. I'm going to play a drow. If it's someone who's played a drow recently in my campaign, I will try to gently talk them out of it. These are my friends. I have to be mindful of how they feel about things. Plus, these are all veteran players that know exactly what they're asking. So drow can be a bit of a headache out of this book. Deep gnomes. Snurv Neblin. These guys can be trouble too because they get some powers. They can cast blur on things. They can summon elementals. Uh, it's just really strong. Player character Deep Gnomes can use the following spell-like abilities once a day: Blindness, Blur, Change Self. That's pretty powerful. However, let's see what else. They can summon an Earth Elemental starting at 6th level. If you're not an illusionist, you can perform this feat in typical fashion. The magic user conjure elemental. Type of elemental, if any, is summoned. And it's once per day. So I can summon up a 24 hit dice Earth Elemental all the way down to a bad roll of a 19 or 20. Summoning fails, cannot be attempted that day. I always felt that this table was flip-flopped. The 1 should have been the bad effect. The 20 should have been the good effect. I have run it that way. I just flip-flop it on the fly. But it's weird that it's the opposite of everything else in D&D. So Deep Gnomes can also be a bit of a problem. If you have a campaign where someone wants to play a drow and somebody else wants to play a Deep Gnome, that can be a problem, but that can also build great role-playing opportunities. So it is something that I don't necessarily stop. I've run both drow and Deep Gnomes in my campaigns. Again, they're not deal breakers. They're tough, but they're not deal breakers. So that's a general look at the races. The rest of everything else in this book stays kind of the same. Half-elves, halflings, half-orcs, and then, of course, humans. So nothing really changes for them. So we get a couple of the super races, as we came to call them. And then weapons and shields they can use, etc. Now we come to the cavaliers and all that stuff. I'm not going to go into that right now, but I am going to look at the fighter. Weapon specialization. Wow, not even a full page. It's about 2/3 of a page, and this is the thing that put the game kind of on its ear for a while. Weapon specialization is really neat, but can be a game breaker. So basically, when my campaign starts up and I've decided the location, everybody's picked their character class, their race, they've rolled their characters, everything's good. My players generally do not take the time to whip up their weapon and non-weapon proficiencies. We'll do that usually together for the first 10 minutes of the new campaign. I insist that all weapon and non-weapon proficiencies be written down before the player starts playing the character. It's something I feel strongly about. I'm pretty lax on a lot of things, but that's something I don't want them adding skills, non-weapon skills later, because the circumstance dictate it would be useful. So I'm pretty strict on that one. But weapon specialization. So someone comes to you and says, I want to play a drow ranger bow specialist. Okay, let's get bow specialization out of the way first, because it's the more difficult of the two to deal with. When a bow specialist is in your campaign, if they're shooting anything between 6 feet and 30 feet away, they have a special range or point blank category for damage. And that damage is they are +2 attack, +2 damage. They throw a die 6 for the damage, but they add the +2 damage to that and then double it. So let me say that again. You take +2 damage, throw your die roll. So say your die roll is a 3, 2 + 3 is 5. Now double that, it becomes a 10. This is a first level character. Now to be a bow specialist, you have to give up 3 weapon slots at the character creation. So if a fighter becomes a bow specialist, they can only have a 1 weapon that they're proficient in other than the bow. If a ranger does it, they only start with 3 proficiencies. They have only the bow that they're proficient with, and everything else they fight with in melee is at -2. So that does balance it out a little bit, and the fact that their super damage is only between 6 feet and 30 feet does tend to mitigate it a little bit. However, my players caught real quick for what we call the tank formation. You put the 2 big, strong, usually sword specialists in the front, and you have the archer fire from behind them. It ends up being pretty darn devastating. So you got to be careful with bow specialization. I don't ever remember allowing 2 in one campaign. And again, I look at this and I say, well, my last campaign you played a bow specialist. Let's do something else. Somebody else maybe have a shot at it, or maybe I'm going to ban it in this game. And yes, I have banned bow specialization in my campaign from time to time. It just can be overwhelming because keep in mind my double damage and within 30 feet. I get 2 of those around, and I get a 3rd one if I have an arrow knocked at the beginning of the action. So I can be doing that 3 times in a round. That's a devastating possibility of 48 points of damage if I were to roll max on all of that. And my players did have a bit of a hard time understanding how to calculate the damage, so I whipped up this handy-dandy little chart. This is all based on your die 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your 1 plus 2 equals a 3. 3 times 2 doubled is a 6. So all you have to do on my little chart here, throw your 6-sider, I go to the 3 column, my damage is 10. If I'm using a +1 bow, I add 1 more to that. And I give this out to my bow specialists. Everybody by this time has had one of these charts. I usually don't print them out like this. I did this for the video, so it's nice and big for everybody. But I thought this was one of the best things I'd done as a DM once bow specialization was introduced. We were having a heck of a time with people calculating their damage. So I said, well, here's a handy little chart. You threw, I just threw a 3. You threw a 5. 5 plus 2 equals 7. 7 times 2 equals 14. Your 5 is a 14 damage. Boom, done real quick. So my bow specialists have really appreciated this chart. I've been doing this chart pretty much since the bow specialist came out. So this is a handy little thing, and I recommend it highly even for experienced players. It's just a quick way to do it. They can write any of their bonus damage here. They can write their bonuses to hit here. It's just a handy little chart. So now let's go to handheld weapon specialization. Specifically, I'm going to dial in on the sword. Sword specialization is either single or double, and you can start out with single or double specialization. So if I get sword specialization, I'm going to be a brand new fighter. I've got 4 weapon slots to fill. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take longsword, and I'm going to be a longsword single specialist. What that gets me is I gain +1 to hit and +2 to damage with my weapon, and that's in addition to my strength and magic bonuses, if any. But at first level I won't. I'll have strength probably, but I won't have magic. So it's +1 to hit, +2 damage, and I get 3 to 2 attacks in the round. 3 to 2 attacks is a very confusing thing in AD&D, and what it means is I get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. First round I get 1 attack. The second round I get 2 attacks. 3 to 2. That's how it goes. It's how I remember it. It's 1 the first, 2 the second. If there's a break in the action, I make the player reset at 1. They don't get to carry over if it's the round where they would get 2, but there's a round gap in between while they drag somebody out of the combat or help somebody in other ways, then it resets at 1. I'm very strict on that. So the specialist then goes up. When they hit 7th level, it's 2 to 1, and then 13th level, it's 5 to 2, which would mean I would get 2 attacks the first round, 3 attacks the second. So pretty devastating. Again, very quick. You're looking at your damage go way high if my guy is +2, +4. With the weapon specialization, he's now +3, +6. So on anything but a 1, I'm going to drop a maximum hit dice hit point orc. Max hit points for an orc is 1 hit dice, 8 hit points. My min damage is going to be a 7. That's my force for the strength, 2 for the damage, and then at least a 1 on the die. So I've got a really good chance of just plowing my way through orcs. That was the one thing that actually did make me sad about weapon specialization when it was introduced. I love orcs. They're one of my favorite monsters. They're definitely my favorite low-level monster, and they weren't what they were. It kind of took my orcs away, broke my heart a little bit, and then I just doubled their hit dice. But the point is, orcs as written became kind of useless once weapon specialization came in. That being said, swamp the specialist with a bunch of orcs, and they're going to wear them down quick enough, and you can drop him. It's simple math. So now my fighter has come to me and he said, okay, I actually don't want to single specialize. I want to double specialize. Okay, double specialization. He gets +3 attack, +3 damage. Still the 3 to 2 attacks per round. But he's +3, +3. Now, if his strength is still giving him +2, +4, he is now +5 to hit, +7 damage out of the gate, literally killing an orc every time he hits, and has a really good chance of hitting that orc. He's going to be hitting that orc on something like an 8. So orcs, again, kind of get it in the neck, so to speak. And with double specialization, they do kind of get the short shrift. Now, the other thing I have done in the past is I've said, okay, you can start out, you can have weapon specialization, but only single specialization. So your first level, you're going to start out single specialized, and then when you go to 3rd and you get another weapon slot, I'll allow you then to double your specialization. And that works pretty well because by then you're fighting tougher monsters anyway. It's not as big a game changer. I've done it every way I've just discussed, and it works really well. One other area that this became a real problem was for daggers. You can get 3 in a round throwing them. And for darts, you have 4 in a round. I had a player who rolled up a gnome dart thrower. No, it wasn't a gnome. He was a human. He rolled up a human, and he rolled a legitimate 1-roll double-out strength, something I have never done on single roll. But he rolled double-out strength, so he was +3, +6. So he said, okay, wait a minute. Now I'm going to specialize by throwing these particular weapons. I'm +1 to hit for a thrown weapon and +2 damage. I have decent dexterity that gets me a +1 to hit on that as well, plus my strength. So I am now going to be cranking +1 for my dex, +3 for my strength, +1 for my specialization. It's +5 to hit. And my damage is going to be +2 plus my natural 6. It's going to be 8. And I get to do that 4 times in a round. That was a very hard character to deal with. And it was only a freak of the dice, and I've never really had to deal with it again. But this guy knew the books really well, and he found something really good to play. So he played that guy, and that guy was devastating. I made him go retrieve his darts every time. I made him keep track of his darts. If I caught him where he, maybe missed one or another, we in agreement that I think he could carry, I want to say like 18. He had a special bandolero made up. He paid for it and everything. I think it was 18 that I allowed him. If he were to not count for them and I were to catch it, he would throw a die 4, and that's how many darts he would have lost in that combat. So that kind of helped limit it too, because he became a little more cautious about throwing the darts. So you do end up with some power things in this. The other thing you end up with power in here, or the other thing that was confusing in here, is you end up with hurled missiles or hurled weapons getting 3-2 attacks at level 1. Wait a minute. Hurled missile weapons per the AD&D Player's Handbook no range weapon gets 3-2 attacks. And yet here we have it, again, not play tested. We have it where you do get it. So if I'm going to be an axe specialist, I can throw 1 axe the first round and 2 the second. Yeah, it's a little problematic. I didn't like that they applied the number of attacks per round to that. We have it also here under the crossbow. It's 1 for every 2 for a heavy crossbow, but for a light crossbow, when you hit 7th level, it's 3-2. 1 the first, 2 the second. For a heavy crossbow at 13th plus level, it's 3-2. 1 the first, 2 the second. So these are missile weapons that are gaining that ability, and that broke the original rule from the Player's Handbook. And that was some of the complaint with weapon specialization. And I looked at it from a lot of different perspectives. I thought something was needed to kind of bring fighters back up a little bit. Over the years, magic users and even clerics had seen a lot of love, but we didn't really see fighters get that love. One other thing I have done in my game, because clerics have always kind of been, baby fighters. If it's a cleric that worships, say, somebody like Thor, who's a warrior god, I would let them have weapon specialization, single specialization only at first level, but it had to be in the deity's weapon, so in this case, a hammer. So I allowed the +1, +2, 3-2 attacks per round for a cleric because they specialized in the weapon to emulate their deity. It's worked out pretty well. I don't let them double specialize till they hit 5th level, which is the next time their cleric is eligible for weapon proficiency. It's worked out really well. I haven't had a real problem with it. I've only had, I think, 2 players take me up on it, and one was a worshiper of Thor, which is why I used him in my example. So weapon specialization can be a bit of a pain, but as long as you regulate it, and when I start a brand new campaign, I tell the folks, okay, I'm limiting 1 bow specialist, period, and you can be a sword double specialist, that's fine. I'll allow up to 2 of those. But I also go for diverse classes. Sometimes you will get somebody that'll come in and say, I want to be a ranger, cleric, drow, bow specialist. Talk about power gaming. I've had it happen to me. It depends on the campaign. It depends on what I'm doing in the campaign, and frankly, the number of players in the campaign as to whether I'll allow that or not. My players and I always discuss things and come to an agreement between us before we go forward. So that's it about starting out your campaign. One thing I do want to mention, I mentioned in the earlier video that I wasn't starting a campaign at this time. In fact, I am. When my players became aware of the video about starting a campaign, they said, well, hey, we're between campaigns. Do you want to start a new campaign? I said, okay. So I'm actually starting a campaign just north of the gnarly forest and around the divers area. So I will be actually doing some notes from my campaign that I'm going to be throwing in here. So that's kind of a nice change too. So that's all I have to say for today. Please remember the Patreon. I would appreciate the help. Again, I'm making that drive to try to get my subscriptions to 1,000. If you can help me out on that, I'd really appreciate it. Polite criticisms, any comments are always welcome. And I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on page 121.